The first time you felt it, you probably didn't even notice. A small request from your manager, an extra report, a quick call on a Saturday, a favor that barely felt like a favor. You said yes without thinking. But here's what's fascinating. That single tiny yes was the first domino in a chain your boss has been relying on long before you ever entered the building. And the pattern behind it is older than your job, older than your company, older than the very idea of the modern office itself. Now let's go back to where this pattern was first dragged into the light. In 1961, at Yale University, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram ran an experiment that would change how we understand authority. He brought in 40 male participants, told them they were part of a learning study, and asked them to administer electric shocks to another person, a stranger, whenever that person got an answer wrong. The shocks went up in voltage, from mild to a maximum labeled 450 volts. The stranger, of course, was an actor who wasn't actually being shocked, but the participants didn't know that. They could hear the actor screaming in pain, begging them to stop. Yet, when the experimenter, a man in a lab coat, calmly told them they had to continue, 65% of participants delivered the full 450 volts. Think about that for a second. 2 out of every 3 ordinary people were willing to inflict what they believed was lethal pain on a stranger, simply because an authority figure told them to. But here's the important part, the part that connects directly to your workday. Milgram's experiment didn't just show that people obey authority, it showed something much more specific. The participants didn't obey because they were evil or cruel. They obeyed because the situation was structured so that each step felt like a natural progression. You start with a small shock of 15 volts, then 30, then 45. By the time you reach 300 volts, you've already said yes so many times that saying no would force you to admit you were wrong all along. This is the psychological pattern your boss depends on. It's called the foot-in-the-door technique, and it was formally identified in 1966 by researchers Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser. They demonstrated that if you get someone to agree to a small initial request, they become up to 27% more likely to agree to a much larger request later. Your boss doesn't need you to say yes to a massive, unreasonable demand all at once. They just need you to say yes to the first small thing. That first small yes, that is the crack in the system. And if you want to keep seeing how these patterns play out in your everyday life, subscribe to this channel. Because what comes next is a look at exactly where your own foot-in-the-door chain begins. Drop a comment with the word first if you can remember the last small request that set off a chain for you. Now, let's layer this with another experiment that made the pattern even clearer. In 1951, at Swarthmore College, psychologist Solomon Asch ran a line judgment study. He showed participants a line on a card and asked them to match it to one of 3 lines of different lengths. The task was absurdly easy. You could see the correct answer instantly. But there was a catch. Every other person in the room was an actor who deliberately gave the wrong answer. 75% of participants conformed to the wrong answer at least once. They ignored what their own eyes were telling them because they didn't want to stand out. Now imagine this same pressure, not in a lab, but inside an open-plan office where your colleagues around you are already complying with the manager's request. The social proof reinforces the obedience. When 70% of your peers accept a new procedure, your own compliance rate jumps from 42 to 68%, according to a study published in Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Processes in 2020 by researchers Kelly and Thibault. You're not just obeying authority, you're obeying the weight of the group. But the pattern doesn't stop at conformity and small requests. Look at the Hawthorne studies, conducted between 1924 and 1932 at Western Electric's Hawthorne Works in Chicago. The researchers who ran them discovered that workers' productivity increased simply because they were being observed. It didn't matter what changes were made to lighting, breaks, or work hours. The mere presence of an authority figure paying attention made people work harder. The effect is called the Hawthorne effect, and your boss knows it. That's why they walk through the office, stop by your desk, or schedule a one-on-one check-in. Your brain interprets their attention as a signal that you are being evaluated, and your compliance deepens automatically, without a conscious thought. Now, here's where it gets unsettling. In August of 1971, Philip Zimbardo ran the Stanford prison experiment. He assigned ordinary college students to roles as guards or prisoners in a simulated prison. The study was supposed to last 2 weeks. It had to be stopped after 6 days because the guards, who were given no explicit orders, only labeled authorities, rapidly internalized their roles and began humiliating, dehumanizing, and psychologically torturing the prisoners. The prisoners, in turn, became passive and compliant, accepting the abuse as normal. The study showed that once you're placed inside a hierarchy, your brain rewires itself to accept the authority structure as legitimate, even when the authority is arbitrary, even when it makes no sense. This is the organizational culture model that Edgar Schein formalized in 1978. Leaders embed compliance through artifacts, the office layout, the dress code, the meeting rituals, until the very air you breathe tells you that obeying is the only option. Think about your own work environment right now. The open plan desk, the standing meetings, the performance reviews, the small request on a Friday afternoon. Each of these is a layer in the foot in the door chain, and you've already said yes to every one of them. Your brain doesn't experience these as separate decisions. It experiences them as a single continuous stream of compliance. By the time a manager asks you to do something that actually violates your ethics, 58% of workers admit they would follow the direct order anyway. That data comes from the Ethics and Compliance Initiative's Global Business Ethics Survey in 2021. When the order came from a peer instead of a senior leader, only 22% complied. According to the 2022 study by Gino and Ariely in the Academy of Management Journal, the shift of 36 percentage points is the difference between an authority figure and an equal. The difference lives entirely in your perception of hierarchy. Those 58%. That number is not an abstraction. It lives inside the office culture you walk into every day. If you want to go deeper into the experiments that reveal your own wiring, subscribe and join this community of minds trying to understand the ancient programs running beneath modern decisions. And in the comments, tell me one micro-compliance you recognized in yourself this week. Use the word 58 so we can see how many of us share that pattern. But wait, let's step back and ask a question your modern mind rarely considers. Why does this pattern exist at all? If compliance can override your ethics, your perception, and even your memory of what your own eyes saw, how did evolution ever allow such a fragile system to develop? The answer is that in your ancestral environment, this pattern was not a bug. It was a survival tool. 200,000 years ago, on the savannas of East Africa, your ancestors lived in small bands of 50 to 150 individuals. In those bands, there was no boss, no manager, no performance review, but there was a hierarchy, the alpha individual. The one who had proven themselves the most valuable or dangerous had authority over resources, movement, and decisions. Obeying that authority was not a moral failure. It was a life-saving algorithm. If the leader told you not to walk into that thicket because a predator was there and you listened, you survived. If you ignored the authority and walked into the thicket, you died. Your ancestors who obeyed outlived the ancestors who constantly challenged. The ones who asked why too many times got eaten. You are the descendant of the ones who said yes. Now here's the problem your ancient brain faces every single day. The modern workplace is not a savannah band of 100 individuals. It is a corporate structure of hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of people organized in artificial hierarchies. Your brain has no evolutionary preparation for that. The same system that protected you from predators in the African bush now makes you vulnerable to manipulation in an office. Your boss is not a tribal elder. Their request to falsify a report is not a warning about a predator, but your brain processes them through the same ancient algorithm. Trust the authority. Do not argue. Comply. This is why you feel a physical sensation of tension in your chest when you receive an unexpected message from your manager at night. Your body is preparing to obey before your conscious mind has even read the words. And the most insidious part is that your boss doesn't even need to know about Milgram or Zimbardo to rely on this pattern. They have absorbed it by osmosis from a culture that has been building on the discovery since 1963. Every corporate training, every chain of command, every performance metric is a tool that harnesses your brain's ancient wiring. The question you have to ask yourself is not, is my boss evil? The question is, why does my own brain cooperate so willingly? Let's look at the numbers again, because they are where the truth lives. Gallup's State of the American Workplace survey in 2022 reported that 71% of US employees say they often comply with informal requests from their manager even when they disagree. Think about that weight. 7 out of 10 people in the room with you right now are doing things they don't agree with simply because someone higher up the ladder asked. The foot in the door doesn't even need to be dramatic. It works through the accumulation of micro-compliances. The quick meeting you didn't want to attend, the email you answered on a Sunday, the report you wrote that you knew was pointless. Each micro yes primes your brain for the larger yes that comes later, and the larger yes is where it gets dangerous. In the 2022 study by Gino and Ariely, 58% of participants said they would obey a direct order to falsify data. Now, think about that in the context of your and my world. The Harvey Weinstein empire didn't fall because one woman said no. It fell because one woman finally broke a chain that had been built through decades of small, seemingly harmless yeses. The Enron scandal didn't happen because one executive woke up evil. It happened because thousands of employees complied with small, incremental requests that gradually normalized ethical blindness. The pattern is always the same. Small, yes, leads to medium. Yes, leads to large. Yes, leads to the moment you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person who agreed to it. But here's the reversal. Your evolutionary psychology brain needs to hear. Your compliance is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of ancestral intelligence. Your brain was optimized for a world that no longer exists. The problem is not that you comply. The problem is that your compliance algorithm is running in an environment it was never designed for. If you can see that, you can begin to understand the real leverage point. The pattern your boss depends on is not magic. It is biology. And once you see biology, you can start to decode it. Now, what do you do with this knowledge? This is the moment where the parallel narrative structure I opened, ancient brain, modern office, must converge into insight, because understanding the pattern is not enough. You also need to understand what your brain is actually doing when it complies, and that requires looking inside your head, literally. In 2024, researchers Lee and Kim published an fMRI study in the journal Neuropsychologia. They scanned the brains of 38 participants as they made decisions under either an authority figure or a peer. The result was striking. Authority-driven decisions elicited 15% greater activation in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or DLPFC. This is the part of your brain responsible for executive control, planning, impulse suppression, and cognitive flexibility. Your brain works harder, literally burns more glucose, when you're choosing to obey an authority figure than when you make the same decision for yourself. You are not a passive victim of compliance. Your brain is actively wrestling with the decision, and the effort itself makes the decision feel more legitimate to you afterward. The harder you work to say yes, the more you convince yourself that saying yes was the right call. This is the final layer of the pattern your boss depends on. It is not just that you comply. It is that your brain retroactively rewrites the narrative of the compliance to protect your sense of agency. You tell yourself you chose to work late. You tell yourself the extra report was a good idea. You tell yourself the unethical request wasn't that big a deal. Your brain manufactures the justification after the fact, so you never feel like you were coerced. That manufactured justification is the final lock in the chain. Once you see it, the whole system becomes visible. If you want to keep stepping back from the pattern and reclaiming your agency, subscribe. Because the next video breaks down exactly how to interrupt the chain before your brain finishes rewriting the story. Before you go, drop revoked in the comments. The signature your ancestors left, revoked by awareness, So where does that leave you? The first loop I opened was about how your ancient survival wiring gets hijacked by modern hierarchies. The second loop was about how your brain interprets small requests as low stakes, then gets trapped in a chain of growing compliance. Both loops close now into the same truth. Your boss depends on your compliance, not because they are a master manipulator, but because your own neural architecture makes it the path of least resistance. Every yes primes the next yes. Every justification strengthens the pattern. The real power, though, is this. Once you see the mechanism, you can pause it. The moment you feel the tension in your chest when a request comes in, you can ask yourself a single question. Is this the first request in a chain, or the last one before a boundary I actually need to set? The answer to that question is not about good or evil. It is about knowing that your brain will try to rationalize the yes before you even finish asking the question. Your job is to catch the yes before your ancient wiring executes it. This is the skill that separates people who end up living by other people's priorities from people who reclaim their own. You are not broken. You are an ancient mind in a modern world, and your compliance is a signature your ancestors left in your genes. But a signature can be revoked. It just requires seeing the pattern in real time.